Hi everyone, my name is Paul Brooks, and welcome to the Deal Doctor. This is my first one. I'm brand new to the company, a couple months old, but wanted to say I've been in real estate 31 years. I've been with 3 different real estate companies. It's been very interesting 31 years with all the different things that have changed. The topics I'm going to talk about today is the pre-offer disclosure form and contingencies that 5-Star has created, and then I'm going to also talk about some of the issues with the seller disclosure and some examples of how you can use it and hopefully help prevent sellers and buyers of getting in trouble. So anyways, thanks again for having me, Don. Hopefully I can continue to help out when I can. So let's go through this. The 5-Star pre-offer disclosure form is set up for the buyers, and then when I first saw this form when I came here, one of the things I really liked about it is it kind of gives you the what to say and some of the way you can write up the offer that I think has just been done so well. So it goes through a lot of different items on here. I'm not going to try and read a lot, but I'm going to point out some of the highlights of this. So it's to go over with a buyer before they write the offer. I think you could do it a couple meetings after you even talk with the buyer and just say, this is what we're going to be doing when we make an offer. Part of the problem is I think we dot loop so quick that we don't explain as us old guys used to do back in the day, where we'd have to sit down with someone face to face across the kitchen table. So the form is like this. One of the first thing it talks about is the earnest deposit and what you do with the earnest deposit, and explains that we have to turn the escrow deposit in within 2 business days. The next section talks about seller concessions and then explains a verbiage that you can use in your contract to explain what seller concessions are. And the cool thing about this is you initial each area that you talk about. And one thing it says buyer understands that requiring seller concessions could cause the buyer to view your offer as less competitive. So, especially in a seller's market. So it just kind of reminds you to be able to explain these things to your buyer. The other one obviously is a mortgage, where the buyer agrees to apply for a mortgage within so many days, and I think we can explain that to them. Again, in today's market, we don't really have to, we have to have a mortgage application in before to get the offers accepted. So that's a little different, but when the market was not as hot, we weren't as on that as we should have been. There's great clauses in here for inspection contingencies. The buyer has been advised at 5-Star agents to have as many inspections the buyer believes necessary. Talks about the heating, plumbing, radon, swimming pools, things like that. So there's good verbiage in here to use. The next section explains to the buyer of how we're not supposed to direct somebody to a home inspector, that we have to give them choices. 5-Star especially recommends inspectors to determine if there is or has been penetration of water in the basement or attic areas. As an example, choice of inspector is a buyer's decision, and buyer acknowledges that 5-Star has not made any recommendations regarding the buyer's choice of inspectors. 5-Star and its agents has made no statements, written or verbally, regarding the roof, water in the basement, grading issues, and the parties agree that the broker and agents are not liable for errors and omissions made by said inspectors, repairmen, or other professionals. And I think that's a really good one today. As much as we have our people we go to, which can be a pro and can be a con, obviously the rule of thumb is to give them a couple options that people can at least pick, because some inspectors you probably don't want from bad experiences. So that one's a little, you got to use your discretion. And then there's a clause in here which is great verbiage again for if you're waiving the inspection and what that means. It's as is, and that you're going to determine the buyer is going to determine the condition of the house on their own. And then again, there's a spot to initial. The other one, which always comes up a lot in the purchase agreement, is the survey contingency and what we should do with that. I can't tell you how many times that people will say, well, what should I do? What should I do? The lot lines and stuff are, you know, you can kind of see where they mowed the grass, and things like that, and they know where the lines are. But there's so many other things that can be in a survey that you can't see. So one of the places that you can go to check a price of a survey and the different types is Naderveld, and not promoting them or not. I just have used them in the past, and they have a nice website. If you go to naderveld.com, there's a tab that says place your order. It leads you to a drop-down screen, and then once you click an order, then it asks you if you want an estimate or to actually order one. And then if you get an estimate, then it'll be back in 2 days. They do it relatively quick, so you can get an idea what it would cost, because that's the biggest thing, is what it's going to cost. The cost is kind of based on how much work a company has done in an area. So it's probably better to get the bigger companies because they have more information that will help with the pricing, because they don't have to do as much work if they've done a lot of work in the area. So I would work with someone like that. There's other great companies. You know, they initial that. We've made neither 5-store or agents made any statements, verbal or written, regarding survey issue, property boundaries, easements, shared or deeded rights of way. Buyer chooses or not to get a survey. We used to do a lot of mortgage surveys, which we don't do much of those anymore either, but it just kind of shows that we have kind of explained what the survey and how it works on a purchase agreement, and that's what this is for. The next one is title work. Being that we have an affiliation with Star Title, we have to disclose that to our potential buyers and sellers, but this form is really more for the buyer. The other thing that I've heard a bunch of times is when no one mentions home warranties. This is a place where you can go over the home warranty up front, and it talks about if they want to purchase one themselves, if they want to request the seller to purchase one, or decline. So it's just something, again, it's a great talking point. The next item is the chattel agreement. It just talks about that you can't have the personal property in the purchase agreement, and again, it's a good reminder to explain that, and that has to be put on a different addendum, a place for them to, again, initial. The next one is the condominium sale. This is a little more detailed, and again, it's got great information to be able to share with what you're trying to do to protect the buyer with the condominium laws. Buyer requests or does not request the condominium addendum. So in the West Michigan regional agreement, there's 11 items that are on the addendum that you would attach with the purchase agreement to help with the buyer get information on the condominium association, the financials, if there's any lawsuits, judgments against it, assessments that might be coming up, and just kind of get the information for your buyer. One of the things with the condominium is that the bank does a lot of this work for you. The problem is it's probably a couple weeks out before you would get the information. I've spoken with mortgage officers, and they don't have many loans that are declined because of something wrong with the condominium association, but there could be assessments coming up, lawsuits. We had one in Grand Haven where all the patio decks on this big condo building were all bad, and every condo in that building was assessed 20 grand. Obviously paid over time, but you know, when that hits the deck, it's going to be an issue, and we need to know those kinds of things. So the West Michigan Regional Addendum kind of goes through that very specifically, and So I would highly recommend using that, and if you got to put 7 days on it, you can, to get the information. But these treasurers at the condominium associations are very used to this information being sent out because they do it all the time. The other thing is, next item is a lease agreement. Buyers requesting a copy of all leases and verbal contracts on the property, and then it's again a verbiage for you to write in the purchase agreement, and gives you X amount of days to accept that information, or you terminate this agreement. The next one is possession contingencies. To negotiate agreement on pre and post possession addendum, and sellers establish a predetermined amount of money to protect the property in case of damage to anything left in the house. You know, we always put a number in there, and the question is how do you collect it? It's always very hard, but at least you can explain that to your buyer, that we're going to put some monies in here for damages if they don't move out and move their stuff out. Let's see, yeah, and the buyer has advised to stipulate a large daily penalty fee in case the seller fails to provide possession as stated in the purchase agreement. So again, all these forms have these initial places on them for each of these kind of lines that I'm kind of going over with you. The appraisal gap guarantee. There are 3 different scenarios that kind of work with that, and one of them is the buyer may terminate the contract and seller agrees to release the earnest money deposit to buyer if the gap is not met. Buyer may offer some amount to fill the gap between the purchase agreement price and the appraisal price up to a maximum amount. Buyer agrees to provide proof of funds at time of offer to fill the stipulation in the event the appraisal gap guarantee becomes necessary. The third one is negotiate with seller to establish a new base price on the appraisal. Buyer understands that the appraisal does not establish a new basis for the price of the home. Example is appraisal price plus appraisal gap guarantee. If the appraisal price comes in low and the average gap guarantee will not cover the difference between the appraisal price and the purchase price, the buyer may make up the additional difference with additional funds or terminate this offer. And again, just some really good verbiage here. Then the basic hold harmless to the company and us agents. Another one that is more popular today than ever, that, you know, back in the day we didn't even have home inspections, let alone walkthroughs. So one of them is buyer understands that they can conduct a walkthrough of the property within blank days prior to the closing to assess the current condition and blah, blah, blah. And then there's a check mark where it says buyers and buyer's agent will and or will not add the following clause to the purchase agreement. Buyer reserves the right to conduct a walkthrough of the property within 48 hours prior to closing to assess the current condition or completion of repairs. Should there be items missing or property damage of unfinished repairs, buyer may elect to terminate this contract and have their earnest money returned, or negotiate the remedy with the sellers through escrow monies agreement. So really, this form, like I said, I've never seen a form like this. It's great. It puts a lot of the clauses in place that you have on basically 5-6 sheets in one, and I just really able to explain what's happening in the purchase agreement, and gives you verbiage and things to write into your purchase agreement. I can't tell you how many times an agent has come to me and said, how should I write this? And I'm digging through all my one-line contingency sentences, and this is kind of your one-stop shop for that. So this is available in the 5-star Addendum Form department there. So that's that form. The company is really hoping that we can get everybody to use that on every transaction. And I think it makes you look so much more professional that you've explained this stuff, because a lot of things that I hear from sellers and buyers is, well, my agent never explained this to me. I didn't know that's how it went. I didn't know I could offer this or do that. So I just think it's one of those things that would be just make you look so much more professional. So with that being said, let's go over a couple things with the seller disclosure. One thing that was interesting, when I was kind of studying this a little bit, I found out that the Seller Disclosure Act was in 1993. So it's really not that old, 28 years old. So I started in 1990. It was kind of interesting. I thought we always had a seller disclosure, but I guess I didn't when we started. But I just want to highlight a couple things on this that we get into troubles with. One of the things is that the seller must fill this out. I wouldn't touch it, write on it, do anything with it. This is all the sellers, but I think you have to direct them. And one of the things is that we get all the time, you all the experience this, is where when you have the appliances and all the things that are on this disclosure, that if they're not going to include it, they check no. So the question says, is the range oven working? Yes, no, you don't know. And of course, the last one is not available. So that's how you have to do it, because again, people have seen it where the sellers fill it out wrong. And I think if I'm doing dot loop, I try to explain that up front to them to kind of answer it that way. And if you don't have a garage door opener in control, you hit not available, not no. Okay? One of the things that is added on the recent seller disclosure statement that says, it's kind of in small print. I put a big pink kind of purple line on it. But it says on here, because this is another thing that comes up a lot, is that, well, the seller checked yes, that the range, refrigerator, and washer and dryer work. And we move into the home and they're gone. This does not apply to the possession of these appliances and things that are included in this thing. And that's what that line says. So that's very important for your buyer to understand, to make sure, unless it's written in the contract. Basement, and has there been water in the basement? This is one of the items that it doesn't matter if it's been fixed. You have to disclose it. If it's 25 years it leaked and it hasn't leaked in the last 25 years, you have to answer the question. Yes, it leaked 25 years ago. Another one that a lot of people don't even know what it is this urea formaldehyde foam insulation. This was used between 1970 and 1980. 1980, they outlawed it, and people always says it was cancer and stuff like that. It's not about cancer. It's more about like respiratory, headaches, dizziness, eye irritation, stuff like that. So again, it's just information that you can have and you know something about it. Obviously the roof, the leak, and those things are pretty self-explanatory. One of the things that can cause trouble with a transaction is the flood insurance. There is a really good website, floodsmart.gov, and again, you can just put in your address and then it'll come up and it'll show where the lines are and stuff. One of the things that I've had a couple agents is challenge the flood plan or the flood insurance thing, and it does take some engineering work to do, but there's the slope and how far the house is from the water and the last 100-year floodplain and things like that. So if the line looks like it's really close, I would do some more investigating with that, but floodsmart.gov will help you with that. Again, another part on this condominium, another part on the seller disclosure is talks about the condominium information and making sure that the buyer knows what they're getting into with the condo book and guidelines and association, the homeowners association documents and things like that. Again, the underground storage tank has been the death of me, and a couple times with some agents where there was a tank and you find the tank and stuff like that. So to really ask these questions. One of the things that I think you got to tell your sellers is that if the seller doesn't tell the truth, the neighbors will. And the death of the seller is your neighbor who goes up to the new buyer and go, did they ever get that roof fixed? Or did they ever fix the water that they get in the basement when it rains really, really hard and stuff like that? So you got to kind of use those kind of stories, I think, to help explain to the seller that this is your kind of get out of free jail card for things that happen in a transaction. So as you heard many times, disclose, 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 and then disclose more. So that's kind of my pitch on that. I have some questions and answers that I found online that I think would be good to help with some real life situations. But I want to mention another disclosure form that is not required, but I think it'd be helpful in a sale of vacant land. And there's a 2-page, and it's quite extensive, of a vacant land disclosure form, and I think it just helps to the buyer knowing what they are getting into. And there might be some things that the seller knows about the property that would be very helpful of them feeling somewhat relieved in buying the vacant land. So there's a lot of things in here are probably going to be checked unknown, but at least it's here, and I think it just helps with the liability for the buyer and the seller. So we have about 8 minutes left. I want to go over a couple questions. This might be a little redundant in some of these questions and what we went over, but the Seller Disclosure Act in 1993 is for 1 to 4 unit properties, okay? One of the things that is a misnomer is with 2, 3, or 4 unit properties, those properties have to have a seller disclosure filled out. The reason is because I've owned rentals, other people own rentals in the business here, and the tenant will call and say my roof's leaking, or I got water in the basement, what are you going to do about it? So there are some things that the landlord owner will know that needs to get on the disclosure. There are going to be a lot of things that we don't know, but the tenant's going to call and say my stove doesn't work. So those are the things that we need to go through. You can't cross a line through it like the old days and say seller has never lived in property. That doesn't fly. So here's a couple questions that I thought I'd just go over a minute. Here's the first. I just went over the seller disclosure or the vacant land disclosure. I'm listing a vacant land. Should I have my seller complete a vacant land disclosure form? The seller of vacant land are not legally required, provided a disclosure form. Seller who do provide vacant land disclosure forms should be cautioned against making any representation where they are unsure. And that's the thing I wanted to say. When people don't know, don't have them guess. Just say no, or excuse me, say unknown, I don't know. I think when the seller guesses in good faith, and if they guess wrong, we got a problem. And they'll say, oh, I never knew that, and then we're in trouble. So that's the one thing I want to point out with that one. Here's the one about the basement leak. My seller says that her basement leaked 10 years ago, but she says it had some grading done, and now the basement doesn't leak. You still have to answer to say, yes, it leaked at this date. Currently, it doesn't. Here's one. My seller bought a house at a sheriff's sale. Now the redemption period has expired. He has decided to list a home for sale. Is he exempt from the seller disclosure form? No. The foreclosure exemption for the Seller Disclosure Act applies only if the lender acquires a property through foreclosure, not the third-party purchasers. Okay? I currently have a property listed by heirs of a man who died in the house as a result of a spider bite from a brown recluse spider. Does my seller have to disclose this information? Unless the prospective buyer asks if someone died in the home, you do not have to disclose this information. And this applies to murders and anything like that. You don't have to disclose it, but if the buyer asks, you have to tell them. Here's a good one. I am listing a 10-acre residential property, listing 10 acres of residential property that is traversed by a utility easement. The easement will service a house development in the near future. Is my seller required to disclose the easement? And the answer obviously is yes. The Seller Disclosure Act requires residential property disclosures by easement affecting the property. A local township is selling a resident property. Is it required to fill out a seller disclosure? No. Because it's a government entity, estates, trustees, and foreclosures, they don't have to fill out a disclosure statement, a seller disclosure statement. The example before this was that it didn't go into complete foreclosure. So if it's in full foreclosure, the bank does not have to fill it out. Let me see another one here. Does a seller have to disclose if a home is modular? The Act says no, you do not have to. An owner of a home I am listing inherited the home from her father. She does not live in the home, but legal title to her name. Does there need to be a seller disclosure statement? Yes, while property owned by an estate is exempt under the Seller Disclosure Act, as long as the personal representative does not live in the home, once the property has been distributed from the estate to the heir, it is no longer exempt. Let's see, so there I have trustee. Here's another one kind of talking about the estates and bankruptcy. I'm listed in REO property. The bank is exempt from providing the seller disclosure form, but I'm being told that the agent representing the buyer that my client must have signed a seller disclosure form that has the word exempt on it. Is this true? No, there is no provision in the Seller Disclosure Act that requires an exempt party to provide a form. A seller client who is in the trustee of a property owner by her parents' trust and in which she is currently resides, I seem to recall from continuing education courses that she is not exempt from the Seller Disclosure Act. Am I correct? Yes. The Seller Disclosure Act exempts transfers by a non-occupant fiduciary in the course of the administration of a trust. Since in your situation, the trust lives in the property, she is not exempt from the form. So those are not a lot of the ones that you get into with the seller disclosure, but I think the best advice I can give on filling those out is really go through it with the sellers and ask the questions and help them fill it out, but don't tell them what to do. Don't let them guess. I give a lot of stories of things that happened when people fill them out incorrectly or try and lie. I hate to say it, but I like I said earlier, that the neighbors will tell, and they'll find out, and then you'll be getting a phone call. So it is 1:29 on my computer and watch. So does anyone have any questions or anything that you have? Again, my name is Paul Brooks, for the people that don't know me. My number, if you like it, is 616-836-0428. I am, titled as broker support. I'm going to be helping with the deal doctors, broker support along the Lakeshore, Grand Rapids area. We have Tracy North and Kim South, and we have a lot of people here to help you. So any questions at all, please give me a call. I'll be glad to help. And yeah, thank you very much, and have a great afternoon.